Two NFL quarterbacks from the state of Texas, Dak Prescott, CJ Stroud, two very different paths. Does CJ Stroud have some disadvantages that matter most when it comes to getting to the same level or maybe even above the level of Dak Prescott? One of the most polarizing men in sports media thinks maybe so. Was he out of line? Let's assess, let's cuss, let's discuss in another edition of The Locker Room.
Yeah, it's The Locker Room on YouTube. You know what it is. Let's get it. Hey, Locker Room. Yeah, we in the locker room. Texas talk. Yeah, you know what we about to do. Localize every angle's what we really do. We the source. We the pulse of the city too.
Welcome to The Locker Room, number one source for Texans daily digital content. I'm Landry Locker. You can hear me Monday through Friday, 10 to 2 on Sports Radio 610. I want you, after you finish watching this video, to like. I want you to subscribe. It is the number one source for Texans daily digital content. They are on a break right now. They're going to be back on the field in a month. I'll be on the field at training camp, bringing you the best coverage possibly on the Odyssey app and Sports Radio 610 and right here in The Locker Room. Appreciate everyone for coming through. CJ Stroud, all eyes are going to be on CJ Stroud when training camp begins. How good is he going to be? Is he going to start? Is he going to be a franchise caliber quarterback? Is he going to make you forget about Deshaun Watson, or is he going to make you remember about the rough quarterback days before that? That is the question, and that was discussed by Colin Cowherd. And in doing so, Colin Cowherd of Fox Sports 1, he brought up another polarizing quarterback in Dak Prescott with the Dallas Cowboys, and he had the internet going nuts. He had Texans Twitter going nuts with some of the stuff he said. Let's assess what Colin Cowherd had to say and whether or not it was fair. Does Colin Cowherd have some good points? Does he have some bad points? Was there overreaction? Go figure on the internet from Texans fans, and could CJ Stroud end up being better than Dak Prescott or as good as Dak Prescott? I've said from the beginning, I think that's kind of the ultimate for CJ Stroud. I think that would be really good. If he's as good as Dak Prescott, that's awesome. You're talking about a fringe top 10-ish quarterback. If you can get that, I know it's the number 2 pick in the draft. Some people assume you have to be God's gift to quarterbacks. You go back and look at quarterbacks drafted early on, 90% of those guys drafted in the first round, teams would trade for Dak Prescott or the caliber of quarterback that Dak Prescott has been. Let's hear what Colin had to say. He starts talking about the talent that CJ Stroud possesses, which I don't think any of us can dispute, and he brings it back to Dak Prescott. This was Colin. We'll react to this. By the way, don't forget to subscribe, like. It is The Locker Room. Appreciate you for riding along.
Stroud, yes, is more talented than Dak Prescott. Easily. He was a much better high school quarterback, a much better college quarterback, and NFL scouts and GMs rank him as a much better NFL prospect. He's better than Dak. But that's where quarterback is really interesting and unique in our American sports landscape. Is he as mature as Dak?
Our American sports
landscape. Is
he
as tough as Dak? Does he have the leadership skills of Dak? Is he as resilient as Dak? Dak is very highly ranked on intangibles. And part of that, most of that, my guess, comes from Dak's journey. Dak got sacked 55 times at Mississippi State in his last 2 years. I watched a couple of those games. He got the hell beat out of him. He didn't have star receivers, star left tackles. He was on the 8th or 9th best team in the SEC, or at least best program. He made him better for the short term. All that toughness. Meanwhile, CJ Stroud went to Ohio.
All right, so we can get where this is going, and we'll pick up where Colin left off. Couple of things. First of all, I don't disagree that you need intangibles. And I think to be a quarterback, I think most guys will tell you got to be somewhat of a leader. And I don't question Dak Prescott's intangibles. I don't question Dak Prescott's leadership. I don't question his journey. I don't question his path. By the way, CJ didn't have a great path either. That's probably something I don't expect Colin Cowherd to know. But he didn't have an easy childhood at all. I do think, though, that sometimes intangibles can be over-romanticized and overblown. And I think it's great that Dak Prescott is is the way he is. And he seems to be a real authentic dude. But sometimes, it's not like he's completely untalented. Maybe people slept on him early on, and maybe he ended up slipping through the cracks for whatever reason and ending up at Mississippi State. But sometimes I think we overblow intangibles. And if you watch Dak Prescott when it matters most, you watched him the last couple of seasons, he pissed the bed. Like, he pissed the bed. All he had to do last year was be mediocre. And the Cowboys beat the 49ers. He couldn't outplay Brock Purdy. Brock Purdy wasn't even good against the Dallas Cowboys. And Dak Prescott came up short. Season before that, San Francisco, into the game. Dak Prescott screwed up at the end of the game. Didn't know the rule. Didn't hand the ball to the ref. Came up short. Wasn't sharp. Where were the intangibles there? So we talk about these intangibles, and it's fun to say, and it sounds cool, and I'm not even saying it's not true, but sometimes they're overblown. Sometimes they're over-romanticized. Now, as far as Dak Prescott having to battle a little bit more and it being a little bit more difficult for him at Mississippi State as compared to CJ Stroud at Ohio State, I agree with that. That's 100% true. I don't disagree with that at all. I mean, CJ Stroud, by this time next year, he's either going to say that he threw to 4 or 5 first-round picks at Ohio State at the wide receiver position. Of course, he threw the better wide receivers at Ohio State than he's going to throw to in the NFL this year, and maybe that he'll ever throw to. So yes, that is true. Now, as far as the adversity and all that type of stuff, I think that if we're talking intangibles and we're talking about these hidden things and we're going as deep enough as the childhood, I would argue, and I think Colin would probably agree, that the pressure of being the quarterback at Ohio State pisses all over the pressure of being the quarterback at Mississippi State. I mean, let's be serious. I'm sure Mississippi State is a rowdy place. I'm sure they got a fun campus and stuff, but at Ohio State, if CJ Stroud loses one game, the diehard Ohio State fans think he's an absolute clown. They think he sucks. They want the coach fired, and hell is frozen over. Hell, there's probably times where Ohio State wins games by 2 touchdowns, and CJ Stroud feels like he sucks. Or people feel like CJ Stroud sucks, Ohio State fans. He's got to go face a room of media that has more members in it than probably Houston media, top 5 market media. And he's getting fired up all the time. He's having to walk around Ohio. I mean, you're just a notch below LeBron James when you're the quarterback at Ohio State. So as far as pressure and adversity, I get that from a talent perspective and stuff around you that Dak Prescott had less, probably had to overcome some things. But the intangibles, I think, get over romanticized. And I think the pressure that comes with being the quarterback at Ohio State, it is pretty damn close to what you'll have to deal with in the NFL. Let's hear more from Colin on Dak Prescott and CJ Stroud.
State. His left tackles were 5-star. Go on to the NFL. 5-star wide receivers. Look at the last 2 classes he's been throwing to at Ohio State. Some of the best college receiving corps in the history of the sport.
Fact.
Great coaches, well-funded in a much weaker conference where Ohio State, outside of their game against Michigan, has a significant talent gap. Easier route. Now, I'm not saying CJ Stroud had an easy childhood. I don't know about it. But the 2 things that matter in this sport at quarterback, where do you land and what was the route like to get you there?
All right, let's listen to this.
Dak landed because he was a 4th-round pick to, at the time, the emerging best offensive line in the league, Tyron Smith left tackle, Zach Martin, and Zeke at running back, with a offensive head coach who was a quarterback in the league. That's a darn good place to land. CJ Stroud has a first-time offensive coordinator, a defensive head coach, and an offensive line 24th in the league last year. Ohio State has never had a great NFL quarterback, and I believe I know why. because unlike the SEC, Ohio State usually has significantly better players than everybody on their schedule except the Wolverines, and maybe an out-of-conference game or eventually a bowl game. And because of that, their quarterbacks get overdrafted, meaning they get drafted near the top of a draft to better franchises and eventually don't have the talent and unravel.
All right, that's where I kind of got to disagree with Colin there. So he's right about all the talent stuff, the adversity, all that. I do agree also that Dak Prescott went into a favorable situation. The Dallas Cowboys were not top 5 draft pick bad the year before they got Dak Prescott. What happened was Tony Romo got hurt, so they drafted in the top 5. I think Anthony Richardson, if he's able to take advantage of it, is in a similar-ish situation. They also had a very good offensive line. Now, the head coach, I wouldn't say Jason Garrett's like a great head coach or an offensive guru. So I would kind of tap the brakes there. I wouldn't necessarily agree with that. I also think the Texans' offensive line could be a lot better than many people expect. I don't expect Colin Cowherd to know about the Texans' offensive line, though, because he does a national show, and the Texans have been nationally irrelevant. So I think that the offensive line could end up being a little bit better. I also think Bobby Slowick is a little bit more better of an offensive mind than maybe Colin would give him credit to when he talks about D'Amico Ryans. Like D'Amico Ryans is kind of an open-minded defensive coach. But this notion that Ohio State, and there's exceptions to all these things, like it's not absolutes, but this notion that Ohio State quarterbacks get drafted higher because of the talent they have around him, I don't think that's true. I think I think there have been times where there have been guys that have come out of Ohio State that haven't performed, but outside of Dwayne Haskins and CJ Stroud and Justin Fields, who are we talking about? Like, are we completely dismissing Justin Fields? Like, do we not think Justin Fields is good? Maybe you don't. And I'm not saying Justin Fields is great, but do you think he was overdrafted? Dwayne, I don't know. But we've seen guys that have had a ton of talent around him. Joe Burrow had more talent around him at LSU than we've ever seen. And before that, we could have said LSU quarterbacks aren't good. Maybe they just weren't good. But he was throwing to Chase. He was throwing to Jefferson. He was throwing to Marshall. He had Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and he was fine. Sometimes it's just about the actual player. Sometimes it's just about the actual guy. Joe Burrow lost he lost a quarterback battle to one of the guys that Colin was talking about. Like Alabama, if we're talking about the caliber of talent that Colin's talking about with Ohio State, we're talking about really a few programs. Alabama, Georgia. That's really it. Maybe you want to say LSU when they're at their best. But we've seen quarterbacks of those programs not get drafted high. We've seen that happen before. So this notion that CJ Stroud just simply gets overdrafted because of that, I think it's kind of selling NFL guys short. Let's hear more from Colin, who is making some pretty good points, though.
CJ Stroud will fail. I don't see a lot of the juice. I think he's fine. His comp is Jared Goff.
He's not saying.
I don't know if he throws the football that well, but he's not going to get Sean McVay as a head coach. And he may never get 2 offensive lines as good as the Rams his first 3 years and the Lions now. Goff's gotten great O-line protection for most of his career and offensive coaches both times. I do not believe, as talented as CJ Stroud is, and he is more talented than Dak Prescott, high school, college, and now, right, coming out of college. I don't believe he's going to have a 98 passer rating, complete 66% of his throws, and go 61 and 36. Where you land and how hard was the route to get you where you land are the overwhelming keys in this league. I like CJ Stroud, kind of. Dak today, less talent, more W's, better team this year, offensive coaches, McCarthy and Garrett. Good luck to CJ Stroud.
All right. Of course, where you land matters, and I do agree with that. Now, as far as the Jared Goff thing and the offensive lines and all that type of stuff, I don't think he's very well versed on the Texans offensive line. I also don't think that he realizes that he's going to be coached by Bobby Slowick, who we don't know about, but a guy that kind of comes from that same pipeline, that Shanahan McVay pipeline. So he is going to be coached in that same manner, and I think he is going to have better offensive lines. And I think Colin realizes if you go from the tackles that the Texans have and what they've invested on the interior offensive line, if that pays off. So I don't expect these national guys to know much about the Texans. I wouldn't. But I do think he's kind of missing that. But as far as like the Dak CJ thing, I think he does a good job of laying out the positives and the negatives, but saying that it's about how difficult things are for you and that's what makes you an NFL quarterback, I don't think that's true, and I don't think that's necessarily a proven fact. Could it matter? Sure. Did he lay out a good case that Dak went through more in his college career than CJ Stroud did? Sure. I don't think he's factoring in the mental part of things. But to speak in absolutes and act like you have to go through all kinds of adversity and stuff to be a good NFL quarterback, I wouldn't really agree with that. Did Peyton Manning? What did Peyton Manning go through? I mean, there's been all kinds of quarterbacks who've just been the man from beginning to end. Again, there's exceptions. But when you speak in absolutes and say it had to have been difficult for you, A, I think there was some difficulty with CJ Stroud. And B, I don't think speaking in absolutes there is that. But there were some interesting things there. And look, Colin's good at doing what he does, and he put that out there. I don't think what he said was as bad as what the reaction was on the internet. I actually thought he made some good points, but don't agree with all of them. And I also think, talking about systems and talking about, Ohio State quarterbacks haven't done this and Alabama quarterbacks haven't done that. It might be true right now. And there might be reasons. Maybe it is because of the talent. Maybe it is, because of the actual systems, but there's always going to be an exception that comes around at some point. And if you assume certain things, a lot of times that's where you get that's where you end up getting kicked in the ass as an NFL team. I'm sure when the Chicago Bears were evaluating Mitchell Trubisky compared to, let's say, Patrick Mahomes, much like all the teams that passed on Patrick Mahomes, I'm sure they were talking about air raid quarterbacks. And that Texas Tech offense, man, none of those guys do a damn thing in the league. Look at it. Like, we don't want that. That's not going to work out. Boom. One of the best quarterbacks of all time comes around. Aaron Rodgers falling to the 20s of the NFL draft and landing into the lap of the Green Bay Packers. I'm sure Jeff Tedford quarterbacks were being mentioned when that was going on. You saw all the busts. Boom. Aaron Rodgers, the end. You never say it again. So, yeah, it is valid. And it is factual that, maybe there are some variables that make it easier for CJ Stroud. But to pretend like he didn't go through anything at Ohio State when it comes to the extra pressure that comes with being a quarterback. And also, let's be honest, the Quinn Ewers thing, I know it went viral. CJ Stroud, before he took a snap at Ohio State, they paid a kid $1 million. NIL did $1 million to skip his senior year of high school and come pressure him. That's a hell of a lot of pressure for me, and that's 2 weeks before the season starts. You go through camp with all your teammates and everything like that. You're about to get your first opportunity. You haven't thrown a pass at Ohio State yet. And they got some kid that's skipping his senior year of high school and he's getting paid $1 million. And you have the craziest fan base there is. I think adversity can come in different ways. I think CJ's definitely been through it. Now, has he been through it like Dak? Obviously not. Does it matter? Who knows? But as Colin did say, he does have the talent. Also think that Colin's kind of sleeping on the offensive line and the offensive staff that he could have around him. What do you think of what Colin Cowherd had to say? What do you think about the comparison of Dak Prescott and CJ Stroud potentially being in the same tier? I like the Goff comparison, and I think the Dak Prescott tier is good too. I think we're talking about the same caliber range of quarterbacks. Maybe you have higher expectations. Maybe you have lower expectations. Again, need more likes. Subscribe, like, right along. Appreciate everyone for coming through. This has been another edition of The Locker Room. No matter what happens, whether CJ Stroud is awful, whether he's better than Dak Prescott, whatever, when it comes to this Texan stuff, we are all in this together. Subscribe, like, right along. Appreciate you for coming through.
It's The Locker Room on YouTube. You know what it is. Let's get it. Hey, Locker Room. Yeah, we in the locker room. Texas talk, yeah, you know what we about to do. Localize, every angle's what we really do. We the source, we the pulse of the city too. Landlocked, got the game in the headlock. Localize every time, can't stop, won't stop. Yeah, we top 2 and we not 2. Plugged in daily digital on YouTube.